Hi there, my name's Chris Nichols. I'm a real estate agent with TaylorMade Deep Creek Sales and a cartographer in Garrett County, Maryland. And a couple of projects I've been working on have been looking at large landowners in the county, and I just thought it would be an interesting analysis to kind of do a comprehensive look at all of the big landowners in the county. So just doing a quick overview of what I did. I took the Maryland Department of Planning's parcel data set, which you can download at the website below, and that data has both information about the owner's name or entity name, the address, and some information about the owner, as well as geospatial information about that parcel, its location, its size, its shape, all that kind of stuff. So use that data set to analyze the ownership of all the properties in the county. I classified owners mainly into private and public type of ownership types. So the private just kind of was all of the privately owned parcels of land, with one exception, which I'll talk about. And then the public land I classified into federal, state, county, and municipality. And conservation is the exception that I broke out. It is really a privately owned type of land ownership, but it was interesting to look at conservation organizations as their own standalone breakout. If you've been around Garrett County for a while, it's no surprise that about 25% of the county is publicly owned by those public entities, and most of that, 23%, is owned by the state of Maryland, and most of that 23% is owned by the Department of Natural Resources, which manages the state forests and state parks in the county, of which make up most of the state ownership of that property. There are some caveats with the data. I won't drill into the methodology and process here at the front. I'll just jump right into the results, but there was a couple slides at the end to explain some assumptions and some adjustments I had to make to the data. But let's just jump right into looking at the high-level analysis of the ownership types in Garrett County. As I said, the public ownership is about a quarter of 25%. You can see the state ownership in green is about 23%, and you have federal, county, and municipalities all a little bit under 1% each. And then the private land ownership at 74% in the gray, and then that conservation organizations are another about 1%. And so that brings the total private land ownership to about 75%. And then we're going to look at the overview of the whole data set. In this data set, there's about, there are exactly 30,594 parcels in the data set that I downloaded from the State Department of Planning. Just very coincidentally, there are just about 30,000 people in the county. That's a total coincidence, but I thought it was an interesting one. The total acreage that I came up using this data set was 420,633 acres. The U.S. Census has 419,840 acres. So is that close enough? Probably. What I think is happening here is maybe some of this acreage here along the Potomac with Jennings-Randolph Lake, all of that on the other side, on the right side of the what's here, a white line, is West Virginia, but I think that's getting counted. So I think that may explain it. But even if it's not, I think it's close enough for calibration purposes. And just looking at the average of the size of these parcels, the average size is 13.8 acres and ranges from a whopping 10,000 almost acres to 0.0001 acres. Now we're going to drill down into each of those owner types and look at some information on each of those. As I said, the private land ownership is 75% of the ownership in the county, and there are thousands of landowners. I was just filtered out the ones that were greater than 1,000 acres altogether. And this is the list of all the ones that are over 1,000 acres. And most of those are coal or timber companies. There's a couple of interesting exceptions. We've got the Rock Lodge Trust owns a big, very large piece of land just north of the state park. The Youghiogheny Homeowners Association still owns a lot of that development land. And I did anonymize. There was one owner that was just a person, so I did anonymize that. It is all public data, so you could go look it up, but I decided not to just call out individual people. But anyone who had an incorporated or an LLP or any LLC in their part of their name, I included them and listed them. And most of these, all the rest of these, are either timber or coal companies, which makes sense. You buy up a significant amount of land to develop those type of resources, and even though coal is kind of on the downslope, it is still holding on to a lot of pieces of the land that were part of the mines that they developed. Looking now at the state ownership class, this is comes to the big caveats in the data set. We'll see at the very end of the presentation, there's a lot of acreage. A lot of those parcels, about 1,200 of them, were completely unlabeled. They were completely blank in the state's data set. And that meant I had to make an assumption about what they were. When you see them on the map at the end, you'll see that almost all of that appears to be pieces of Savage River State Forest. There's some other stuff that looks like it could be county property, but for the sake of not having to go through 1,200 specific records and figure out whether it was county or state owned, I just assigned it all to state, and I named those blank records unlabeled public and said that they belong to the state of Maryland. So I'm likely overcounting what the state of Maryland owns, but you'll see later it probably doesn't matter a whole lot. But the big story here is, I'm assuming that most of this unlabeled public is state property, Department of Natural Resources. It does appear that it's mostly pieces of the Savage River State Forest. And then you have some other entities, other departments within the state of Maryland that own things of, the Department of Health and Mental Services. General services are kind of the big things that, the state owns, of state buildings, that kind of thing. But for the most part, it is Department of Natural Resources owning all of these state forests and state park land. What's kind of interesting is that not many people think of the federal government of owning some substantial pieces of land in the county. And that's really made up of two lakes, the Youghiogheny River Lake in the northwest corner of the county, and Jennings-Randolph Lake down here in the southeastern part of the county, that were built and operated by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So the federal government does own these lakes and some land around them, and as the management of these lakes for flood control and some recreation. But and occasionally the federal government does pop up as a landowner in the county when it seizes property as part of a criminal penalty or a settlement, and then the government owns that land while it disposes of it to sell and provide restitution from the crime. But for the most part, it's these two big lakes that the federal government owns in Garrett County. Conservation organizations is another interesting entity type that I did pull out of the private land ownership. You can see those in the purple blocks, and most of those, the big purple blocks, are the Nature Conservancy, and they own a number, I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 big tracts of land that specifically protect sensitive or endangered habitats and species. So I think it's pretty cool that the Nature Conservancy has, there are so many interesting, unique places in the county that they've chosen to invest in and buy and protect. those pieces of land. So I think that's interesting and important. And then there's also 3 smaller Maryland Ornithological Society sites, 1, 2, and 3. You can see in the purple, they're smaller, but again, kind of an interesting and good thing that those pieces of land are being preserved for bird sanctuary and bird habitat. And then looking at county-owned land in the county, and most of that is related to local infrastructure. So the roads, we'll talk a little bit more about roads in the methodology slide, but the state or the roads maintenance garages, there's several business parks throughout the county that the county owns, things like wastewater treatment plants, and then also a couple of recreation sites, so the Fork Run Recreation Area and the McHenry Community Park and the Meshick Browning Trail area. So a couple of recreation sites, and then the county also owns, through the Board of Education, owns all of the property the schools are on, including the college. So mainly local infrastructure owned by the county. And then when you get to municipalities, so the municipalities don't own the property of the municipality. That's just a defined area. But they do own some of that property within the town limits. And there are 8 incorporated towns in Garrett County, and all of them own some property in or around their town. But some interesting things are 2 Allegheny County towns also own property, and actually the town of Frostburg is the largest municipality owner in the county. Up here in the northeast corner, the town of Frostburg actually owns a reservoir and some of the surrounding land to provide drinking water. So this is up, Frostburg is right around here and uphill from Frostburg, so this is a drinking water reservoir that the town of Frostburg owns and operates for the residents of Frostburg. And I'm not sure what the Barton land is. I think there's like some weird pieces of land right along the border that the town of Barton owns. But just to kind of wrap up the takeaways from this little analysis is, you know, they ain't making any more land, and the county is already owned by about 25% publicly owned. So there's, you know, kind of 2 ways you can look at that. One, the positive way is that private land could be even more valuable since there's less of it, and maybe, you know, in general, if you have a piece of private land, there's a better chance that it borders state land, that usually puts a premium on the value of your property if it's bordering state land. And also, I think there's some premium in the fact that the whole county is got decreased population density and housing density, and that's usually attractive to buyers. So I think there's a couple things that, you know, are good things as far as your property values, in that there's a lot of state ownership of the land, and that may only go up. I mean, it's certainly never going to go down. I don't think there's any significant chance that most of the public owners of land are going to sell to a private owner. And there's part of the DNR's mandate is to increase the amount of publicly available land. There is kind of a veto power by the county, I think, against that. I think there's something about 100 acres. The county can veto DNR purchase of that, because the issue is that all of this land that is owned by the state of Maryland is not available to be taxed by the county, and property taxes make up the bulk of the income, the taxation income for the county. So all of this state-owned land in the county really decreases the total tax base for the county and kind of spreads that burden more onto private landowners. So that's the bad side of all of this publicly owned land. And another takeaway is there's probably a lot of an interesting deep dive we could do into the private landowners, since there's thousands of those and many different kinds of ownerships and what the configurations and that kind of thing with the private landowners. So if you're interested, I might do that, but you have to subscribe to my channel and make comments and send me emails about that'd be something you'd be interested in seeing. But from the look that I took of just the landowners greater than 1,000 acres in the county, is that most of those are coal and timber companies, and which isn't surprising. Okay, if you hung on with me this long, we can dive into the fascinating methodology and caveats of this data. But really, it's as I described, I use the Maryland Department of Planning's GIS data set. There's a good bit of cleanup that I needed to do in there to kind of make sure that all the owner names matched up exactly. They'd have to, letter for letter, have to be exactly the same for the algorithm to kind of group them all in one little group and count all of those acreages together as one owner type. I did anonymize private landowners that weren't some sort of entity or company. Like I said, it's public data, but I just didn't feel like calling out specific people. You can go look it up on your own if you want to be nosy and see who the specific people are that are big landowners. And as we discussed, I think I maybe said it wrong earlier, but there's 1,290 completely blank parcels in that Maryland Department of Planning's data set. So they have the geospatial information. You can see where they are. You can see their shapes, but all of the data on the name of the owner, the address, the type, all that kind of stuff is completely blank in that data set. As you'll see later, and as I described earlier, I just labeled them all as state of Maryland owned, but this overcounts the amount of state-owned land in Garrett County, and you'll see why in the next slide. News article that I found from 2013 with then Senator Edwards said that the state owns about 90,000 acres in Garrett County. My earlier tabulation up in the previous slide had about 96,000 acres being owned by the state, so we're overcounting by about 6,000 acres. And let's just jump in and we can see what's going on here. So in this map, all of the black shaded parcels are the ones that were unlabeled. And like I said earlier, it appears that almost all of that is pieces of the Savage River State Forest that I don't know why. I don't know why they couldn't be bothered to put in the information on. But that appears to be most of that property is Savage River State Forest. So that's why I went ahead and labeled that all as state-owned. But the interesting thing is almost all of the roadways in the county are also part of those blank data sets. So interstates, U.S. routes, and the state routes, so 495 and 135, and the state routes are owned by the state of Maryland, but all of the county roads, I believe, are owned by the county. So I think that's where that discrepancy of about 6,000 acres is mainly coming from, is all of these county roads you can see here. These are all part of that black data set, and they were not being attributed to the county because I made all of these black things belong to the state of Maryland. But bizarrely, there's also a couple of pieces in this black data set that appear to be privately owned. A couple here and there that look like, I can't tell for sure, but they do look to be privately owned. So I want to know how you get on this list so that the Department of Assessment doesn't know where your property is. But those were just some very small little things that weren't going to throw anything off. But overall, like I said, the analysis is really to look at private versus public, and overcounting what the state of Maryland owns, as long as we kind of understand that some of that is really county-owned roadways, I don't think was a big deal. So, if you made it this far, thanks for sticking with it. Thanks for viewing this video. Just the little interesting things that I start getting down in a rabbit hole on. And if you're interested in how this relates to real estate and what's out there, like I said, I am a real estate agent with TaylorMade Deep Creek Sales, and you want an agent who understands what's going on. Real estate is all about location. So if you want to help put my knowledge and abilities to work for you in meeting your real estate goals, give me a call. Be happy to help you out. For other local news and lore and videos and analyses like this, check out my personal website, dimesy.com. And I also make what I think are the best maps of Garrett County, Deep Creek Lake, and the area, and you can buy those at narrowshill.com. So until my next video, or until I see you out and about in the area, thanks for watching and have a great day.